Hello, viewers. Welcome to the show. This is your host, Israr Kasana. As we all know, COVID 19 is spreading all over the globe at a faster rate than before. Alberta is no exception. COVID cases are increasing, rate of hospitalization is on the rise. So, yesterday, Alberta's Premier Jason Kenney, along with his team, announced new measures to slow spread of COVID 19 and declared a public health emergency in Alberta. So the question is, are we moving into a lockdown situation, or these are just targeted restrictions to help stop the spike and prevent Alberta's healthcare system from being overwhelmed? To answer this and other related questions, we are very fortunate to have with us today none other than Premier Jason Kenney. Welcome to the show, Premier.
Great to be back, Israr. It's been too long.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Nice to see you. Actually, wonderful to see you again.
Thank you.
My first question is, Premier, yesterday when I saw you announce these measures, I felt as if you were in a severe pain
Yes.
while taking those measures. Was it really a tough decision for you to declare public health emergency? And could you please give us the sense of all these measures, the gist of all it?
Thanks, Israr. Yes, very painful and difficult decisions. I chaired a 8-hour long cabinet meeting on Monday and another 2 hours on Tuesday to make these decisions. Excruciating effort to balance the need to contain the COVID spread while minimizing damage to our society, economy, jobs, and broader health. Israr, the reason it's so difficult is because for every restriction, there are many people who will be hurt. There are some who wanted us to shut down everything, full lockdown. That's not what this is. Full lockdown would put hundreds of thousands of people out of work, would destroy thousands of businesses, many of which are the life savings, the hopes and dreams of those business owners. And it would have a devastating and permanent impact. And we wanted to do everything we could to limit the spread without that kind of broader damage. When people go without work, when they lose their life savings, many turn to depression, anxiety, drug addiction, spousal and domestic violence comes out of this. And we have to balance these things. I think we struck the right balance in the restrictions, focused, targeted, especially on those things that are the highest cause of COVID transmission, with an absolute ban on indoor social activities. And if there's one thing your viewers need to, in Alberta, need to understand, please don't socialize. We know in the, South Asian community, a lot of big families, extended families live in the same neighborhoods, and they come together frequently for family gatherings. We're asking people not to do that now because that's where most spread is happening.
But Premier, do you think these measures are enough? Looking at the number of cases in Alberta, some critics are calling them too little, too late, and some even calling them half measures.
Well, you know what? We just imposed, for the first time in the history of our province, a ban on visitors going into people's private homes. I hardly call that a half measure. We did suspend thousands of businesses yesterday, like convention centers and theaters and auditoria. We did put a limit of 25% on the number of people who can be in a store at any time. These are, by any definition, extreme measures. If these, we have reason to believe, that these measures, if they are respected by Albertans, it's up to them. If Albertans comply with these measures, yes, we will bend down the curve and save healthcare capacity. But if Albertans don't conform with these restrictions, we will have to come back in 2-3 weeks' time with more severe restrictions. As you can see, I do not want to do that. I hope Albertans will do the right thing so we don't have to further damage the broader health of our society.
Right. So I hope that too, Mr. Premier. But you see, our South Asian community, as you mentioned here in Alberta, is very concerned about COVID situation, especially the small businesses. You mentioned one immigrant story yesterday in your speech. There are umpteen number of such stories. What would you say to the South Asian community, especially the vulnerable communities?
Well, I would say that, look, South Asian and immigrant communities tend to be more vulnerable for a couple of reasons. One, many new Canadians work on the front lines in service jobs and cannot work from home. And so whether they might be in the transportation industry, driving a taxi or Uber, or they might be working in hospitals or long-term care, nursing homes, or those kinds of frontline jobs. So there is greater exposure to social transmission. Secondly, South Asian and New Canadian families tend to have more larger families in smaller homes because many of them are starting out their lives in Canada, and so lower income often, meaning smaller homes, but also large intergenerational families. And so, if you have mom and dad working, mom's in a hospital, dad's in transportation, and the kids are coming home from school, and grandma and grandpa are also there, there are good chances of transmission. And then you have the wonderful tradition of extended family gatherings and all. You add all of that together, and we do see much higher levels of transmission in areas like Northeast Calgary, for example. The South Asian and Southeast Asian communities in Alberta represent 11% of our population, but about 19% of cases. So we are very concerned, and we want to help folks in the community to know what the safe guidelines are and to provide all necessary support.
Good. Another very important issue is for the parents, Mr. Premier, about the rising number of cases in schools. Do you think your measures related to schools are enough and will prove effective?
Yes. There was a lot of fear-mongering about our decision to reopen the schools, as there has been across Canada and everywhere else. Israr, I would like to pause to say I think it's unfortunate that some have sought to drive panic and fear through all of this. We can live with COVID. And let me say, COVID is not a health risk, not a statistically significant health risk to school-aged children, period. It is what's called infection fatality ratio for people under the age of 45 with COVID-19 is statistically, it's virtually zero. And now, older kids, teenagers can transmit. Younger kids don't transmit the virus very much. And we've seen very, very little transmission within schools, between students and teachers, or teachers and students. But we do see the schools being more affected as the cases grow generally in society. If mom or dad has it, likely the child will, he's in school, then the class goes on isolation, the teacher's on isolation. So we have been having capacity challenges, dealing with more and more classrooms and teachers on isolation. That's one of the reasons we've decided to move high schools to online learning at home between next Monday and Christmas holiday. And then we are extending Christmas holiday for 1 week to January 11th to allow for a cooling off period after kids from K to 12 have been at home with family. And there's some of them will get positive. We want them to cool off before they go back to school.
Premier, there is very much concern about the details. As they say, the devil lies in the details. And I mean by details, implementation. You talked about aggressive measures. And aggressive measures, the fact that one can still dine at restaurants, still go to the casinos, still be forced into an office by your employer, even when you can work from home, doesn't sound aggressive to me. On the other hand, we saw earlier that some people didn't follow the protocols in letter and spirit. How strict the government would be this time?
Well, we have now moved. The most important thing, Israr, is that we've gone from recommendations to rules on banning indoor social activities, which is the source of at least 40% of transmission, with a $1,000 fine for each individual who violates that. We are expanding the number of people, peace officers, who can, with the police, write those bylaw tickets, those fines, if people violate the public health order against indoor activities. And we've made other more enforceable rules as well. With respect to restaurants, we have evidence of very little actual spread occurring in restaurants. We have 13,000 restaurants, bars, pubs in Alberta, and only 18 identified outbreaks. it's far safer, frankly, to eat in the structured environment of a restaurant these days with all the rules they're following, masks in and out, hands, everything being sanitized constantly, tables distanced, all of those protocols make it safer in a restaurant than at home, believe it or not. And so, so that is, we're okay. That's why for the time being, we're going to, and the other point is, according to the Restaurants Canada organization and the Federation of Independent Business, if we were to shut all of the restaurants now, 40% of them believe they might not ever reopen. And there are a lot of your viewers, many people in your communities, South Asian communities, who are those small business people, do own those restaurants. Their life savings are tied up in them. And God forbid we would destroy that dream, those life. And I regret that ultimately those kinds of business closures may be necessary if we don't get on top of this in the next 3 weeks, which is why people must make an effort now.
Right. This is very important, Premier. Would you like to make any comment on the huge issue of contact tracing? When are we going to set up that COVID alert app so that people can enter a code if they test positive?
So, as you know, Alberta was the first province in the country to develop a COVID tracing app. It's called Alberta Trace Together. We encourage people to download it. It did have some technical problems at the beginning that have largely been corrected. It's a useful tool. The federal government has a different app. It's not a contact tracing app. All it does is to notify you if you've been within the vicinity of somebody who tested positive. The problem with it is that it then drives people who are asymptomatic, who don't have COVID symptoms, to go into the testing queue. We're trying to focus testing on people who do have symptoms or are in high-risk populations. So simply increasing the number of asymptomatic people getting testing is actually unhelpful at this point, which is why both BC and Alberta have decided not to go with the federal app. This is not a political dispute. We have determined that the Alberta tracing app is a more effective public health tool.
Mm-hmm. There is a question from our viewers. They're saying it's very difficult for the democratic government to slash individual liberties. So do you think our liberties are being infringed?
Yes, they are. This is a point I've been trying to make, and I don't know why I'm the only political leader in Canada to talk about this, but we should not be casual about infringement of rights and freedoms. That's one of the reasons we've taken a balanced approach rather than the full lockdown that some are demanding. A full lockdown is an impairment of just about every fundamental charter guaranteed right and freedom. So let me give you an example of how this applies. Yesterday, we put a 1/3 capacity limit on worship gatherings at mosques and temples, churches. And we think that's reasonable, that these churches, mosques can do multiple worship services and cycle people through while keeping them safe and distance at 1/3. But to go to full lockdown means literally locking the doors of those places and interrupting the fundamental constitutionally protected freedom of religion. Freedom of mobility is violated by lockdowns. The freedom to protest, freedom of speech in that respect. So many freedoms would be just massively undermined. And look, I accept that in an truly extreme scenario, if there is no other option to protect broader public health, that some of those infringements may be necessary, but they should only, in my view, Israr, they should be a limited and last resort, not a first resort. And I'm a little concerned that so many politicians are prepared to basically put the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the garbage can right now with so little pushback. We need to be careful about that, you know? So that's what we're trying to do is maximize rights and freedoms and minimize broader social damage while limiting spread.
But Mr. Premier, I always see that there is always a barrage of criticism at you, and how do you tackle that? You know, every single day, you know, I see thousands and maybe millions of tweets against you. So how do you cope with that?
Well, first of all, I guarantee you it's not millions. And secondly, how do I cope with it? I don't go on the Twitter. My staff that deals with Twitter. Twitter is just an anger. It's like become a bit of a cesspool of mutual anger. You
Really?
know, before our announcement yesterday, half of those attacks were saying that I was a dictator taking away people's fundamental rights and locking down the economy, and the other half saying I was irresponsibly not locking down the economy. Israr, I said to our cabinet when we began our very important meeting on Monday that led to the decision, I said, we have to tune out the politics. This cannot be a political decision. We cannot make these decisions based on what the loudest and most extreme critical voices are saying. We have to look at the data, the public health advice. We have to balance it off against considerations like the Constitution, like the broader health of our society. We have to use our judgment and use wisdom, not listen to loud and angry voices.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Mr. Premier, are we getting some data according to some communities like racialized communities, so that if you have the data, you can make better decisions about them?
We are, but I'm going to tell you, Israr, we're not going to release it because we don't want people targeting, blaming, scapegoating certain communities. As I said to you earlier, we have seen pretty significantly higher levels of COVID-19 transmission in racial minority communities. And again, that's not, I hasten to add, that's not to blame or single or target. It's to say it's a reflection of a number of factors that need to inform our public health decisions. And so I'll give you an example. Back in the spring, we had some outbreaks in the meatpacking plants, and the vast majority of those workers are new Canadians, many from East Africa, some people of Filipino origin, et cetera. And we realized too late that many of these folks were sharing, in some cases, there were, many people sharing the same home, the same apartment, and they could not self-isolate because they're low income and they're trying to save up to help bring their families over and all of that story. And so when we realized that, we started offering free hotel rooms to accommodate people who had tested positive so that they actually could self-isolate. So we are tracking, the answer is yes, we are tracking social economic data and racial ethnic community data as well. And it's in a way to try to be as helpful. Now, I'll be blunt with you. One of the reasons I'm doing your show is I'm trying to communicate the importance of these measures to the South Asian community, where we have seen concerning high levels of spread.
No, I really appreciate that. And I think your staff needs an appreciation also, because they felt this need. And, this is the gateway to the, global approach for COVID. And I really appreciate your time because, I talked to Dr. Hinsha the other day also,
Good.
And we were talking about this racialized data. So, but coming back to the issue, Mr. Premier, earlier on, we were, talking about flattening the curve. Now we are talking to stop the spike. Is this a paradigm shift?
Well, the paradigm, I guess, I don't know if it's a paradigm. It's a big shift. It's a shift. The numbers have just gone straight up as we've gone into the fall. I told people to expect this back in the spring of this year. Communicable and infectious diseases of this nature, of a respiratory nature like this, tend to go up in the fall. People move indoors because it's cold outside. They're in closer quarters. This is a coronavirus, which is basically a version of a cold virus. And those cold viruses, they get more virulent during the cold months. So all of this is normal. And Israr, let me say this. We should be very, very concerned. The reason we've taken these measures is if the rate of growth in the viral spread does not come down, eventually it will start to jeopardize our ability to deliver other health services like regular scheduled surgeries and non-urgent hospital care. Having said that, we do not need to panic, all right? Let's put this in context. Absolutely. We have 360 COVID patients in hospital in a province with 8,400 hospital beds and a province of 4.4 million. We're pretty confident we can surge to 2,000 COVID beds or more if really under stress. So we can manage this, but at a cost. and the cost is cancellation of other health services. That's why we have to stop or bend down the curve.
Right, right. No, that's very important. And is the city governments on board? I was just watching Calgary Mayor Nancy talking about different initiatives, and they issued and declared emergency at 1:31 p.m. Today. He was talking about the casinos. He was actually demanding that why the casinos are open. So, any response to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, we have not had a single traceable case associated with the casino since they reopened under safe guidelines in June of this year. Secondly, they have spent a huge amount of money to be COVID safe. They bought barriers, plexiglass barriers between all the slot machines. We have suspended table games yesterday, and we put them on a maximum 25% capacity limit. So having, a small number of people spread out 10 feet apart with multiple plexiglass barriers, wearing masks, with frequent sanitation and no evidence of transmission. On the flip side, if we shut them down, we're putting out of work thousands of many immigrant workers in those casinos, and many of them operate in First Nations reserves, in Indian reserves, where they are the most important driver of those economies and the largest source of revenue for social services on the First Nations reserves. And so the First Nations pleaded with us to keep the casinos open. We've done so on a very limited and we believe safe basis.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I have just one more minute. Can you please tell us, as the South Asian channel, what do you expect from us? How can we support you and support your initiatives to make this happen?
Well, Israr, thank you for asking. Let me just put it this way. I have many, many friends in the South Asian communities, and I've enjoyed the great hospitality of so many of those friends. And dozens of times I've been welcomed at South Asian homes, and the men are in the garage cooking tandoori goat, and the ladies are in the kitchen chatting and making food, and the children are running in between the two, and maybe there's a bottle or two of libations in the garage with the as well. And it's you know what I'm talking. It's a great tradition. And very often the people that are in that context are extended family, or they're from the same town back home, or they're friends and coworkers, and that's just normal. It's natural. It's a very social and family-oriented community, which is a great, wonderful blessing. But what we're saying now is, even if they're your friends, your close family, but they don't live in your household, please don't bring them over and don't go to visit, as long as this rule is in place. I guess what I'm trying to say is anything that you and other leaders in the community can do to convey the importance of no social activities at this time. And there's no exceptions. It may seem strange, but if your brother and sister live in aunt or uncle live in a different home and they come over to visit, you've got to say, I'm sorry, auntie, I'm sorry, uncle, this is not the right time. This is breaking the rules. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I imagine when a lot of people, when I say social function, they're imagining maybe big weddings or big parties. It can even be small extended family gatherings. So that's the single biggest thing we should, I think, try to convey to our wonderful Albertans of South Asian origin.
Wonderful. One final question from the viewers. Will there be any reduction of hours in financial institutions like banks?
No.
No. So that's a big no. So, Jason, one last question regarding the economy and the pipelines. Any good news for the people to know about?
Well, yes, some qualified good news. Trans Mountain continues on schedule with construction. We won some recent legal battles on the Enbridge Line 3, and recently American First Nations signed up to have an ownership stake in the Keystone XL pipeline. So I would say, cautiously optimistic, we're making progress in all three.
And any optimism about the Biden administration?
Well, we are going to approach that administration with a compelling story about how the United States should get its energy from Canada instead of Venezuela and OPEC.
Okay, finally, Mr. Premier, as an adage goes, leadership is about moments. and I'm sure you will capture this moment. We have complete trust in your leadership. Trust me. We hope that you will come of age and lead us all through this crisis very successfully. Good luck and thanks once again for your time. And I hope I will see you once again very soon.
Thank you so much, Isra. I appreciate that vote of confidence, but it's up to all of us together. Thank you for being a leader in your own right, and God bless you and all of your viewers. Bahut shukriya.
Thank you very much.